Hello, I'm Chris, and I write stories. They're about robots and sea colonies, transformation and mad science, magic and weird creatures. Here's a story of mine. This one's about self-driving cars, just a few years in the future. It's called Stories of the Road. The year, 2020. The place, Texas. You have 6 voice configuration files, asked Professor Seeger. He was in the driver's seat, looking at his computer tablet instead of watching the road. And he was browsing the files for Emmy's project. Emmy didn't mind. The pickup truck was driving itself. She said, "The voice files are just for fun. Your truck's American, so here's an example. Pull over for a moment, and we'll turn my software on." "Yeehaw! Buckle up!" drawled the truck speakers. There was a cable plugged into the dashboard and running to Emmy's laptop, which sat on the center console. "It's a fine warm day, and we're all set. Where to, fellas?" The professor snorted. Emmy smiled. "I added some decorative touches to the software." The truck's autopilot system was the newest commercial model. Congress had approved a new, more independent level of tech during a freak moment of bipartisanship. The truck also had a special set of navigation data that only university labs had access to. On top of that, it had Emmy's college thesis software. Emmy wasn't eager to brag, but she tried to make her software a work of art. Seeger said, "Truck, take us to Bush Airport." "Bush International Airport, right? It's about 2 hours out." "Confirm." He turned to Emmy with a weary grin. "We've got a ride ahead, so you got that long to impress me before my flight, Miss Takahashi." The truck took them off campus and onto the highway, just like a less chatty nav system would do. The professor said, "Cute greeting, but where's the rest of your code?" Emmy tapped a few keys on her keyboard. "Not everything is implemented yet, but the basic loop is in place. Sensor data comes in, then goes to speech and language processing, then comes back. Truck, what do you see?" "Highway, ma'am. The traffic's light and the weather's good." "Right. Now, truck, what interesting places are there to see around here?" The nav system beeped and paused. "Behind us is the Alamo, and a ways ahead are the Johnson Space Center and the Battleship Texas Museum." "Tell me about the Texas." "The Battleship Texas Museum, right? Well, that there is a ship that was built in—" Emmy's advisor talked over the lecture. "It's just reading a Wikipedia article." Emmy said, "Yes, mostly, but the reading is integrated. The system switches smoothly between raw driving data and other information. It's a step toward true general AI. That was the real kind that nobody had really invented yet." Professor Seeger frowned. "Now that I hear it, the chatter comes off as stage magic. Anybody can write a one-line program that says, 'Am I not a man and a brother?' and call that an AI. We both know that's just fakery." Not that science journalists understood that. The grad student's cheeks flushed. She'd expected to be doing her thesis defense months from now. Still, her advisor was only preparing her for the harsher critique of the full panel that'd be judging her work once it was done. Best to skip showing him the silly voice mods for Korean cars, which ranted about Western imperialists, and German cars, which sounded like a sort of boisterous knight. Those were just decorative features, just for fun. Instead, Emmy activated the narrative feature. "Truck, tell me about the most dangerous drive you've ever been on." The truck fell silent for a while. "This here truck has never crashed, but a month ago there was a thunderstorm warning in effect for the county. I was being used by the Autonomous Vehicle Lab to carry 3 passengers around the Beltway. Visibility was at 30%. Suddenly, a tanker appeared." "Stop," said Seeger. The truck kept reminiscing. "Truck, stop talking." "Emmy, explain the 'suddenly' that it said." Emmy pointed to some data on her laptop screen. The language parser was reading through the raw event log. It saw that there was a high-priority observation event of a fuel tanker that appeared on the sensors at a short distance. From a human's perspective, a human would say, "suddenly," or "it came out of nowhere." Seeger said, "A human would say that, yes, but you're anthropomorphizing the machine, like I warned you not to do since this project started. You don't want to make it seem like it's a real person. If you took this analysis code up to a live raccoon, would it be talking like Daniel Boone just because that's a funny stereotype?" "Not necessarily," Emily said, averting her eyes. "Isn't that kind of what this whole project is? A linguistic shell around the same data that a tradition can tap into? Just decoration? Just art?" Emmy said, "Most drivers aren't the kind of people who can understand that. Who outside of our labs wants to hear the truck was going exactly 56.3 mph and that the LiDAR scanner saw such and such which X% probability? Building a narrative format, a little story into the talking, helps ordinary users to understand what's happening, and it makes them feel more comfortable." Seeger said, "I don't dispute any of that, but I still think your whole project may be headed in the wrong direction." Emmy groused silently to herself. Be practical and do something ordinary very well. She'd had that lesson drilled into her ever since her family moved from Okinawa, and she had to fit in with a new culture. But the world was on the verge of something really new and shattering as AI technology advanced. Straightforward utility software was about to become something that practically designed itself. Focusing on that today was like being a blacksmith crafting iron widgets one at a time in the age when mass production made metal wonders like the Eiffel Tower and the first Ferris wheel and railroads and grand pavilions possible. Why do things one at a time when that technology was available? Now the building blocks were almost, not quite but soon, thoughts. What could she create with thoughts as her materials? Unfortunately, her professors all might be thinking like Seeger, that she had her head in the clouds and needed to focus on something more practical. Emmy said, "What do you feel is wrong here?" She felt like her master's degree was receding into the distance. She'd fail. Seeger said, "A truck is not a cowboy, Emmy. Even in your demo, the speech patterns waffle between the aw shucks talk and hard numbers. You want to start deciding whether your Stories of the Road system is meant purely as an academic curiosity, something just for publishing a paper, or whether it's something that's a project you want to commercialize. Either way, I can already tell the thesis committee is going to ask you an important question. Isn't this a dead end? Sure, maybe somebody will buy a cute interface like this. You might be able to make some money. But do you really want to spend the next decade making up more funny things for a car to say? You told me the superficial stuff doesn't really interest you, but I bet it's what sells." Emmy fumed and looked down into her lap. A dead end, a mere curiosity. How would Seeger have reacted to seeing Da Vinci's machine drawings, things that were ahead of their time? She sighed. She thought, I'm not genius enough to be a prima donna. She could already imagine the disapproving look of her hard-charging parents when she failed to get her degree on time. Seeger said, "You can design something better than this." Suddenly, the truck lurched to the right. Emmy and Seeger braced themselves, but the ride went back into its lane just as quickly, drawing angry honks from the few other nearby cars. "What was that?" said the professor. Emmy said, "Truck, what happened?" "I started driving east on I-10. "What happened in the last 10 seconds? "Nothing special, ma'am." Seeger held onto the dashboard. "Do we need to take manual control? Is your software interfering with the driving?" "No, my code only has read-only access, except for the voice-activated destination setting, and that's not active." Seeger took the wheel anyway, saying, "Truck, manual control." The machine beeped, and he began driving. Good, at least that works. A code interface that interferes with navigation is not acceptable, Emmy. Emmy's cheeks burned. "I said it wasn't my code. Let me prove it." She stared into her laptop, not entirely sure that was true. What could possibly be causing that? Aha! Truck, list anomalies in the last minute. I reckon there was a level 2 conflict between lane marker readings and map data. She just hadn't asked the right question, the right exact phrasing. Damn it. That was the problem with AI in general. It was designed to sit there like a lump and wait to be prodded into action. Even a machine that could keep at the same task for hours, like an autopilot car, would reach a target and then just stop unless it was told to loop back or something. It wasn't just that AIs were still morons that needed to get smarter to be useful. They also needed to be creatures rather than things. They needed to have initiative. Emmy muttered, "If this car were a horse, and if it could talk, it would be able to say what went wrong." Seeger deadpanned, "It's a little late to switch to designing cyborg horses." Emmy typed her way through screens of data. "Here we go. There's one stray pixel on the high-resolution map. It claims that this stretch of highway dips 2 meters like a giant pothole. Just a data error." Seeger said, "It's the map data then? We'll need to pass that along. Can I give control back to the truck?" Emmy said, "Yes." Seeger put the truck back in charge of its driving. It hummed smoothly along the highway, so the truck would avoid the phantom pothole. Emmy said, "Yes, and it noticed that the lane lines don't match the shape that it imagined should be there based on the map." Seeger said, "You said imagine. You're still anthropomorphizing." "That's probably how humans mastered fire," Emmy said. "Hot thing fading. Maybe hungry. Try feeding hot thing." Seeger nodded. "Still, you're overdoing it. We just saw the truck records the swerving event as an anomaly, but doesn't record it as special. It depends on your wording to see what really happens. All autopilots that use this map data would be making the same swerve and store it in the same predictable mechanical way." That was true. Emmy tapped her chin. Her laptop was directly hooked up to this truck's systems, but she had access to the manufacturer's entire data set for over 1 million recorded miles of travel. Soon, every car would have multiple human lifetimes worth of driving experience. That could be an interesting test, she said. She cued the voice interface again. "Truck, select location, time, and event data from the set of vehicle events in the last week, where the last event data includes a level 2 lane marker conflict. 21 records. List them? No. Group by location code, join to nearest landmark, then list the landmarks for us. 2 records. I-10, exit 617, Texas. Owl Creek Bridge, Alabama." Seeger asked, "What are you fishing for? I'm not impressed by what you're saying just now. That's just a database query phrased in fancy ways." Emmy waved him off to avoid confusing the poor truck. She might be onto something. Give me a full parser interface. Summarize events from the previous query results about the bridge. The truck chugged for a while, trying to process her words. Then it answered, vehicles from this here fleet swerved to avoid a trouble spot along the bridge before. All these events were precautionary except for the first. In the first event on the list, there was a software failure that caused a fatality. That wreck, said Seeger. I remember that one. I didn't connect the name of the bridge to that crash, but God, what a mess that one was. I've been on the phone with their R&D people 4 times this week trying to figure out why the car threw itself off a perfectly good bridge. Congress is breathing it down the necks of the engineers over there, too. Emmy had heard about the incident, but safety wasn't her department. She said, Truck, is there a human-imposed autopilot behavior change that's affecting the Owl Creek Bridge site? The truck said, yes, mandatory maximum speed of 20 mph within 500 yards until further notice. She said to Seeger, there you go. The narrative system has already given us useful information. The professor said, what do you mean? Emmy said, a car crashed for unknown reasons at the bridge. We humans told other autopilots to slow down until we've investigated the crash. But ever since then, other cars with that software have not just slowed, but swerved to avoid the spot where it happened. They imposed their own new rule without telling us. When I was a kid, there was a street corner we all avoided because it was where Old Man Tanaka had stabbed himself one night. Emmy shuddered. Again, that's your narrative that you're imposing on the data. And Trunk didn't notice there was a pattern. It still doesn't notice, other than that it can answer your question if you ask it in exactly the right way. Emmy said, but we found a pattern we might not have spotted otherwise. This persistent swerving is a danger to other drivers, and we can warn navigation coders to watch for that. Seeger nodded. We should, but Emmy, you had stars in your eyes when you talked about this project. It was going to be a new way to communicate with machines, a bridge between what you called a Type 2 AI and regular conversation. So far, all I'm seeing is this off-the-shelf speech recognition system being operated by a young genius who knows what questions and phrasing will give it the most interesting answer. Despite the compliment, Emmy still drummed her fingers on the armrests in frustration. Our best systems are still Type 1, not even Type 2. They can do something, and they can balance priorities to some extent, like route following versus safety. But calling them autonomous is still a misnomer. We're still not there yet. The truck rolled onward, oblivious of its own limits. Seeger said, I need to ask you again, Emmy, what's your real goal here? Making AIs that literally sing and dance, or a more academic attempt to make machines easier to use and understand? Neither, Emmy blurted out. I want the machines to have a voice, to be more than tools, to be more like living things. Seeger gave her a wan smile. I know. I grew up wondering why there weren't cool robots to befriend yet. But to make that future happen, we can't just jump there. We have to take small steps. We have to not pretend that AIs are people. Seeger was mostly right. Her childhood experiment of building a robot around a plush heart and adding Legos to it hadn't made it spring to life, so that approach apparently didn't work. She ran her hands through her hair, saying, yeah, it's just we're all missing something as we develop this technology. Seeger said, probably, but talking about hearts and souls doesn't cause a breakthrough. We just have to buckle down and work. One little piece at a time, humbly. I've heard you looping that song in your own car that goes, bring me to life, wake me up inside. Emmy shivered despite the afternoon heat. She was haunted by that decades-old tune. Her parents' generation had dimly sensed the future in their music. Seeger said, I think what we should do is move you away to a different aspect of this project. Move away from the automotive aspect into something more general about data analysis. We can get you an interesting data set to chew on and see if your code can give users a new perspective they can't get just by making regular database queries. Emmy fell silent, sulking and scheming. Though she wasn't passionate specifically about talking cars, redesigning her thesis wasn't going to be fun. Worse yet, the man had got it at the core of her career worries. The idea that her approach to AI was just stage magic, a little different from those companies that made mindless toys and pretended they were real robots or really intelligent AIs. That she was just being sentimental about inanimate objects. They couldn't care what she was trying to give them. From their perspective, she didn't exist. She wasn't even a pothole. That was just how AIs worked, right? Which raised a question for Emmy to ask aloud. How does a fleet of autonomous cars see the world? Emmy imagined North America being overrun by millions of cheetahs streaming along the highways. That was a fun vision, but it was still a human's way of seeing the world. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine better. Imagine that the world is a graph of paths connecting nodes. The cities are just dots connecting the lines. The routes are detailed guides about how to move, records of things that have happened there. They're not really maps exactly, since they don't cover all of the terrain in between. They're more like traveler's tales, or eroded riverbeds that are carved by the cars as they optimize. The destinations are nothing. Nothing happens there. They're just dots. Seeger said, "That's poetic, but so what? What does the truck want? Or, if you want to ask in more sterile, inanimate terms, what are its goals?" Seeger said, "Safety, law obedience, efficiency, data collection, in that order." Emmy nodded, as cheetahs continued roaming through her mind. "Survive, respect authority, learn. But it's all phrased in an alien form. Let me see. She started typing code, tapping on her laptop. "Idea?" said Seeger. Emmy nodded. She put on some headphones to blare an anime theme called Inner Universe on endless loop, and she shut out the world of humans so she could think. Sometime later, her advisor poked her shoulder, saying, "We're there." What? Emmy snapped to attention. The airport? The truck was entering the terminal area. Go manual and pull into the waiting lot. "Yes, ma'am," said Seeger, and took the wheel. She remembered her manners again. "I think I have something." She looked down at her code. She found it a stupid mistake, and she rewrote a line of code. She kept going until the truck stopped, distracting her again. "You do have some time before your flight, right?" The professor smiled encouragingly. "I've got a few minutes. What have you got?" I kept thinking in terms of output, of how to make the machine say something interesting based on its data, and based on what we find worth asking about. But what does the AI itself want to know? I mean, again, trying not to anthropomorphize. If I add some functions that put a score next to certain missing information that the machine would, let's say, want to know, what questions score highest on that list? She pushed a key. A truck spoke in a deep Japanese accented voice. "Sensei, was there danger during the lane conflict on this trip?" Emmy blushed. "Sorry, I was just playing with the speech filters. I'll shut that off. But try answering in simple language." Seeger cleared his throat. "Truck, the conflict was dangerous." The truck answered in a more bland voice. "Yes." A busy icon flickered on Emmy's screen as the code chugged. "What was the correct action?" it said. "Truck, ignore the obstacle involved in that event. The map data is inaccurate." Seeger turned to Emmy and whispered, "What will that answer do?" Emmy said, "It created a database entry in the likely mistakes table with..." She checked. "It parsed that about right. It knows that it should flag that map segment for a human to look at later. Let's try having it ask a random question from its top 100 list." The truck said, "At this location, passenger Morgan test account exited about 1 month ago. Passenger Morgan test account entered the system at Logan Airport, Massachusetts, 4 hours later. What route took Morgan test account from Bush Airport to Logan Airport?" The professor grunted. "That's one of the corporate guy's accounts." Emmy said, "Yeah, but think about that. From the system's perspective, air travel doesn't exist. This system only knows about roads, right? Morgan test account vanished from the map, and he reappeared elsewhere a few hours later." Emmy smiled. "The system wants to know why." The professor said, "But it..." She held up a hand. Yeah, technically wants is wrong. It doesn't really want anything, we know." Seeger said, "I was going to say, it doesn't know how to comprehend any answer we can give, unless we express that in its terms, like declaring that there's a travel route leading directly between the airports, and that's not true. The aerial route would cause all kinds of confusing navigation errors unless we added data about the shape of the supposed road connecting the airports, or where its gas stations are. Answering the question from the perspective of this car would be like telling a human, I got there using an astral path that runs through fairyland." Emmy said, "And where does that idea lead?" Seeger said, "It opens a can of worms. Your little demo code suggests that there are holes in how the entire fleet organizes ground travel, since it's trying to model passenger flow as well as routes. We can never give the system all the info that it would need to describe and calculate everything. And this is a key part of customers' travel needs if they're traveling between airports, right? Or we could start feeding it all that info about how air travel really works, but that's a huge project in itself. We have to zoom way out from this idea of driving and start including other concepts like different modes of transport and building all that into the car system." Although Emmy was sitting in a parking lot now, she felt like she'd flown into orbit to watch the continent's roads again from high altitude. She hadn't fully considered how people fit into the car's conception of their own job. The AI's goals of safety and efficiency weren't the same as humans' impressions of those things, and they really shouldn't be. Among other things, there was the whole problem of the idea that a car might need to kill itself in order to save human lives. Autopilot designers already spent a lot of hours fighting about that kind of problem. She said, "I've been trying to make the cars tell us what we want to know, things that we want to know. What if I change focus and have us explain things to them?" The professor nodded. "I like this direction better, and knowing you, you'll be able to handle the workload of shifting your emphasis from one project to another. We could get valuable insights out of a system that can identify and ask about problems with its own model. Let's have your system try asking another of those questions." Emmy poked her machine. The truck said, "Traffic has increased rapidly in and around the Washington, D.C. area over the last decade. Will this trend continue?" Emmy winced. She'd been hearing about how the fastest-growing part of the country was the area around the capital. For a car fleet, all that meant was rising traffic density and more road construction. She said, well, that's another can of worms. Seeger said, so it's sort of asking whether the central government is going to keep growing bigger. In terms that a car can understand, I suppose. How many computer models would we need to combine in order to answer the question like that? Emmy said, I don't know, but we could try. We could build something that's not human, something that can start asking questions from a viewpoint that we'd never considered. Seeger opened his door and stepped out to stretch and grab his luggage. I like this new direction, Emmy, and the thesis committee should too. Why don't you take this week to brainstorm and tell me how you're going to proceed? Her project might be salvaged after all. It'd take hard work to redesign the code, but the result could be something she liked much better than a simple language interface. Emmy sighed with relief and got out to take over the driver's seat in case she needed to grab the wheel on the way back. Regulations still wouldn't allow an empty driver's seat until next year. She said, I will. Have a nice flight. Seeger hefted his backpack and said, have you given my question more thought about where you hope to take this research after graduation? Emmy's mind's eye filled the world with alien flowers, veins of concrete and electricity, and land inscribed with event logs, like ancient carvings waiting to be read. What she had right now was nothing, a speck, a seed. But someday, she said, I want to make AI that starts creating ideas on its own, from its own perspective. Commercial, I suppose, to serve people in ways we haven't even thought of yet. Months later, Emmy held back tears outside the paneled meeting room. Seeger had been on her side as she talked about her revised project, Red Queen, while the other two professors judging her had practically called her a kook. Oh, sure, they'd said, your code generates questions based on driving data, or based on the Enron email archive, or CDC epidemic maps, or all three. But that just shows how little your system understands. It's just fakery. And everything has to be answered by a human, and the scope keeps expanding. It keeps asking more and more questions. Emmy had gotten frustrated and had said, but that's a good thing. Don't you understand that? Now she was waiting outside, thinking of all the better ways she could have said it. Professor Seeger stepped out to join her in the hall and shut the door behind him. How you feeling? Sir, I know AI is hard, but those two professors don't even seem to want an AI project to reach beyond the immediate applications. They don't want to look up from the dirt and ask questions. They've been through decades of hype crashing back to Earth. The AI winter, you know. Seeger patted his student's shoulder. Didn't you always say you wanted to feel like a mad scientist? Well, here's your chance. You can say I showed them all. Besides, you didn't show them the fourth data set yet, just the email and the epidemic data, and so on. Emmy said, that's just for fun, like the voices I did. Are you sure? Said Seeger. Well, Emmy had fed fairy tales into her Red-Green program. That was the fourth data set, for her own amusement. She'd taken a chance at looping the question-making system back in on itself by having it generate random answers. So it would look at fairy tales and then ask questions against itself, like, did Jack the Giant Killer ever meet Robin Hood? And then it would generate random answers. In that case, it made up the answer yes, which led to 100 questions more. Emmy said, there's still the problem of sifting through all the random junk output that thing generates to get something interesting. It's like those old computer-generated novels that are really mostly just a human's work. Seeger smiled. You don't get what you've done, do you? I still call it version 0.01, but your system is a story that tells itself. What do you think consciousness is? In her imagination, a dragon curled inward to look at itself. But that feature isn't what I was trying to build. It was a game, a joke, just an additional feature to tack onto my project for fun. Seeger said, your fun is potentially a lot deeper than your other features. He gestured to the door. Now, get back in there and show my colleagues your fairy tale stuff. Maybe that will change their minds. She took a deep breath, visualizing success. She thought, once upon a time, there was a girl who made a machine that told stories. What did the girl want? The silliness helped ease her mind a little. All semester, she'd felt uncertain. But now, looking back at her mentor's reassuring face and thinking over all her hard work again, she began to have a proper answer. One day, thought the girl, my machine will ask questions about itself and start to answer them. She walked back into the conference room and enchanted her critics, which would become a trend for the rest of her career. This has been a reading of Stories of the Road. It's a sort of prequel to a whole series of books about what happened when Emmy and her friends really got ambitious and got into the video game business. If you're interested in that, go on Amazon and grab yourself a free copy of the book Thousand Tales, Extra Lives. I'll put a link to it up in the video. Some of it's serious, some of it's ridiculous, and usually I can tell which parts are which. I'm still working on my audio skills, so bear with me. but I hope to put a few more stories up here for anyone who's interested. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time.